Hi everyone. No, thanks for having me. And before I kind of dive into doing slides, I just wanted to kind of have a raise of hands. Obviously, yeah, BT and BT Group's well known in some of our organisations. So EE doing mobile networks. Often, 4G, 5G connectivity. You can't see it, so you can't feel it. But I just want to have a raise of hand. Is anyone who's used the internet today? So it's pretty important. And I think whenever we lose signal and stuff like that, our world collapses. And arguably on the kind of Maslow hierarchy, it's probably there with the kind of food and shelter in terms of what we need to do our every day. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about BT and what the telco sector as a whole is kind of doing in terms of their route to net zero. So yeah, as I touched on, so BT Group is one of the leading UK's connectivity of fixed and mobile network. Over 30 million customers, so B2B and B2C organisations use our services from both fibre, broadband, cloud solutions and mobile connectivity. Over 200 million devices connected to our network last year. Some huge figures in terms of consumption. We're now getting to the petabyte figures there, and I'm sure soon it'll be whatever the scale is above that. And obviously nearly 20,000 mobile sites across the UK. So obviously you see cell towers all dotted over the place, and obviously looking to increase that coverage over time. And obviously within the kind of ICT sector, so where we kind of sit, as a whole, there's mixed figures out there, but taking figures from one of our trade associations, the GSMA, the industry consumed about 4% of global electricity and represented 1.4% of global emissions. There are other kind of surveys out there that kind of swing anywhere from 1% to 3%, but roughly it does actually put us on par with global emissions with aviation. So often aviation get a lot of bad press. I know British Airways were here yesterday, but the sector we're in also uses a lot of materials, uses a lot of electricity, and has a footprint as well. But interestingly, a big focus within ICT is that efficiency side of things. So even though data traffic has increased over 600% from 2015 to 2020, actually the energy use as a whole has only increased by 5%. And a really good example within our operation. So last year we turned off 3G. That represented about 2% of data traffic that was going through our network, but it represented 35% of our energy consumption. So you can see it's hugely inefficient, and hence why those older networks are getting switched off, and then we're moving to kind of 4 and 5G, because on average, each kind of iteration is about 10 times more efficient. And we're seeing the same gains within switching from the old kind of copper network that we've got to full fibre as well, and that's far more energy efficient. So for sustainability within BT, so it kind of sits under kind of our manifesto pledge as a responsible business, and we have kind of 3 pillars. So we've got responsible, inclusive and sustainable. And where I sit within the business is focused on the sustainability side. So where we've got net zero within our own operations by March 2031, weird dates because we align to our financial year, and then obviously for our value chain to be net zero by March 2041, so both upstream and downstream. And also an element of that is to build towards a circular BT and a circular tech ecosystem. So within our own operations, but then working with all the suppliers within our value chain and other telcos as well to drive that circularity forward, whilst also protecting nature and biodiversity. And I think the real important thing is that they're all linked. Often they get put in silos, but fundamentally there's benefits around circularity that they can drive your footprint down, and then similarly reducing your extraction from nature then drives that biodiversity protection as well. And as was touched on kindly in the intro, so BT has been doing this for over 30 years. So we set our first carbon target back in 1992. So I was probably still waddling around at home then. And then interestingly, as we progress and move forward, we set one of our first targets in 2008 to cut our intensity by 2020. We've been doing full scope 3 reporting since 2012. And then every kind of so often, we sit back, we look and actually see how can we push and stretch ourselves. And currently our targets, as I touched on, is that FY31 for our own operation, cutting our scope 3 upstream value chain by 42% by 2031, and then full net zero across everything by March 2041 as well. So what's our progress kind of been to date? So got a nice little fancy graph, and our base year that we measure from is FY17, because that takes into account actually when we merged with and took over EE, so obviously take into their kind of footprint as well. And overall as a total, we've reduced by 32%. Some areas have moved faster than others, so as you can see within our scope 3 operation, that's dropped down by 25%. And then within our kind of scope 1 and 2, it's nearly halved over time. So through decarbonisation and grid, rationalising some of our energy use, and obviously as I'll get into transitioning some of our fleets over to EVs. So at the moment, the kind of share as of last year was about 20% of emissions sat within our own operation, and then the remainder, so 65% within that upstream value chain, and then downstream in terms of the use of the products and services that we sell. So similar to many other businesses, most of our carbon sits within that scope 3 side of things, and obviously is the tricky one to tackle. But why are we doing this? And this one won't hang around too much on, because a lot of you in the room will understand why. The world is getting warmer, and certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, the big striking headlines of wildfires, flooding, extreme storms are getting more and more, and it's unequivocal that was being man-made. And for industry that is uses a lot of electronics, as you can appreciate, water, flooding doesn't really mix well with that. So obviously we've got a big purpose there to try and play our part to mitigate some of those risks, but also adapt our networks. And similarly, UK is very prone to big storms as well, and just the recent one, we had huge systems going down and network being challenged up in Northern Ireland. So then our Openreach, which is our infrastructure side, we're busy for many weeks, putting masts back up and repairing it so people could get back, so you people can use the internet, because we can't live without it. And then where that links in, then another area that I look at is obviously the circularity bit. And from a recent report from the Circular Gap report, 70% of global emission is linked to our use of materials. And again, then even more startling, 90% of biodiversity and water stress is linked to extraction of raw materials. So really, both of them are linked, and where you can tackle both, you'll get that double benefit. And in that same report, it highlighted that the world was only 7.3% circular, which is crazy. And the even crazier fact that I thought was amazing, that over the time of that report, so from 2016 to 2021, the world had used and extracted 500 billion tons of virgin material, and that was more than the whole of the 20th century. So just in that small amount of time, we'd extracted more material than arguably a period of time when there was huge economic boom. So that's a really big challenge. And so how are BT, and in particular from the telco sector, looking to address this? So, for us, we have the second largest fleet in the UK, so nearly 30,000 vehicles, and obviously that represents a big chunk of emissions. So one area that we're looking to do that is transitioning to EV in our fleet. So at the moment we have about 5,000. We've recently, about start of January, announced an order for another 3,500 electric vehicles, which are due to be delivered over the next 2 years. Obviously, where you can easily transition that fleet, nice and simple. But we've actually got some of our vehicles that are carrying big, heavy equipment, or they're actually going big distances, or in areas where there isn't a huge amount of infrastructure. So where we can do that quick swap out, we do. We also support installing chargers at engineers' homes. So they can charge at home, and also our depots as well. And we kind of have a 3-tier hierarchy. So charge at home. If you can't charge at home, charge at one of the kind of technical depots where the engineers go and often pick up supplies, and then worst case, use public charger. And we work with EV100, so one of the climate group organisation, and Fleets Electric Coalition. So we're always trying to push positive policy from government to support infrastructure. They've recently announced the extension of the EV grant, which is really positive as well, because that supports the business case to roll out EVs, and also supporting on infrastructure. So we've done some trials where we can share stuff with first the bus group, so our engineers can use their charging at their depots when their buses are out, so that our drivers can charge up. The other area of focus is decarbonising our estate. So within the kind of network side of BT, we have about 6,000 exchanges. As we rationalise from copper network to fibre, that will go down to about 1,500. So obviously that then frees up the need to power those sites. Interesting, obviously, with electronics and equipment in there, there also needs to be some element of cooling and heating to make sure things don't either get too cold or get too hot. So obviously rationalising that estate down reduces the footprint on there. Also within our office portfolio, we have over 90,000 colleagues, rationalising some of the offices to kind of big central hubs, which are in buildings which are far more efficient. They're gas-free, so it removes the need from gas, and it just gets rid of a lot of the old creaky stuff. And one of the first things that when I joined BT, someone said, if you ever go to a town and city and you see a really ugly building, it's probably a BT exchange. And when you do go into them, they are pretty creaky and leaky. So where we can exit those buildings and move to far more energy efficient ones, that's really good. And then the last one is building a far more effective and efficient estate. So, we have PPAs, which cover about 25% of our power consumption, on-site generation, which we're increasingly looking to explore as well. And then, we've reduced our kind of energy consumption since FY17 by over 400 gigawatts. And just this little graph just shows, the change in efficiency over time. So the pink line is basically data traffic on our network all the way back to 1997. And then obviously the kilowatts per gigabit efficiency. So you can see that real data consumption really kicked off when, say, 4G rolled out and then ramped up even more as it kind of fiber to copper and 5G. But as you can see, the kind of efficiency drops over time, and you're kind of seeing that curve continue as we kind of move away from old inefficient technologies. So that's something that not just us, the whole sector is kind of really proud and always looking to explore those areas where we can make savings, and in particular within our fixed networks, that's essentially your kind of fibre broadband. The team are looking to explore ways to kind of dial up and down energy consumption. It's actually quite easy to do in the mobile network, so they've rolled out what they call sleep cell technology, where during at night time they can actually turn off some of the cell towers. And over this year, they reckon that probably saved about 17 million kilowatts of power. So they're looking to see if they can implement that same technology within the fixed network. I'm not technical, but I understand there's slightly different requirements within both, hence why they can't do it straight away, but they are exploring that and see if we can get those energy gains in there too. And then within our kind of value chain, and probably a lot of the speakers yesterday were talking how Scope 3 is one of the big challenges. Kind of the three areas that we kind of focus on there is the assessment side, so when we're onboarding suppliers, asking them questionnaires. If there is an agreement, which is over £25 million, we ask them to set an SBTI within a year of joining BT, and we kind of support them in that process as well. And then once those suppliers on board, then it's looking at the disclosure side. So our top 200 suppliers, we request them to disclose through CDP. We ourselves disclose through CDP because we have requests there, but we find that's a really consistent platform to get that data to understand what suppliers are doing. And this next graph to show you of those 200 suppliers, as you can see, there's a diminishing return. So we actually have about 8,000 suppliers, but understandably, that'd be quite a lot of people to kind of go after. So actually, our 200 suppliers here, the kind of green column is their emissions of supplying to us, and then the purple one is essentially the cumulative total. So as you can see, 200 suppliers represent just under 80% of that upstream emissions. So really for us, it's really how can we nail that and really engage with those customers and those upstream suppliers, because they'll have the biggest impact. Also, we don't ignore the lower ones. Some of them we have, we work with the SME Climate Hub to support some of those small organisations, but really actually it's where can you have the biggest impact that will drive the biggest return there. And then to do some of that, we have some really positive collaborations. And I find within the telco sector, it's really collaborative. A lot of organisations work quite closely. We share quite a common supply chain. We're buying from the same OEMs, applying the same handsets, the same network equipment providers. So through some of those organisations, we like to work together and make sure we're kind of asking the same questions. Because you can imagine it'd be really annoying if, 30 different telcos are asking slightly different questions for different things, which fundamentally boils down to the same information. So through JAX, the Joint Association for CSR, it's made about 29 global telcos, and through that we do supplier engagement. So we actually divvy up different suppliers, which we then go out and approach to then understand what they're doing. We're also increasingly asking them for kind of LCA or carbon footprints of certain products, and then once we gather that in, we then share that between the group, either at a product level specific, or it could be a particular service type, which we have a commonality between, and then we can get that data. So shifting away from, say, spend-based to then company level, and then right down to that product level information, because that's where we can have the biggest impact. Then we can see, where are the hotspots within those products, and then have those conversations there. Whereas if you were just going to be a spend-based model, the quickest way to do that is reduce spend, which sometimes doesn't wash that well if you're trying to do lots of stuff within your business. Working through the likes of CDP, again, using their supply chain program to engage those customers, and in particular in the UK, so Tech UK is a great organisation for ICT, where we're reviewing policy, we're coming up with challenges and common approach to tackle these problems. And then, as I touched on, the link within kind of net zero is the bit about kind of circularity. So, one of the kind of easy low-hanging fruit that the business did is looking at the kind of plastics used within our routers and hubs, so increasing that up to 95% recycled plastic in the casing, removing single-use plastic within the box itself, so moving to fully fibre-based. Trade-in, obviously a big area within smartphones, as you can imagine, they often hold their value, and why not use that value to deduct from any new phone you might be buying. So last year, about 166,000 phones were traded in. And the good thing about phones and tablets, they actually have quite a high reuse rate. Because they typically, when people do trade them in, they've probably got another 2 or 3 years of life out of them. Obviously, some of the challenges do come with certain handsets that maybe don't have as long as software support as, say, some of the leading OEMs. But legislation is actually coming out within Europe that will require next year a minimum of 5-year software support. So that will really support the kind of giving those phones a second life, or even in some cases a third life as well. Within our network, so we have the Exchange Clearance Operation Program, so ECO, and that is essentially extracting valuable, end-of-life, end-of-use material out of our exchanges. So old kind of cards that we use in that copper network. As you can imagine, it contains copper, gold, palladium, and also then copper recovery from our network. So we estimate we've got about 200,000 tons of copper within our network, which at some point is going to be redundant. And as you can appreciate, copper is a really important material for the transition for EVs, for motors, for wind turbines. So we're really proactive in terms of extracting that and scaling that up as we switch away from that old network to the new. Hence why we're really keen that if fibre is in your area, switch over to it, because then we can recover that material, and it's not just a single customer saying, no, I don't want to move. We want to recover that material. And also in some cases we reuse equipment, so when stuff is getting extracted, the team work quite closely with other networks within the UK to say, actually, I need that bit for a spare part, because they might be still supporting, say, a legacy network, and rather than having to buy that from somewhere outside of the UK, we can just send that to a partner who can test it, refurb it, and then use it back within our networks. Within our EE store, so we offer repair, and certainly for the main flagship devices of Google, Samsung, and Apple, all of that is under kind of an approved repair process, so we can replace screens and batteries, and it won't affect the warranty there as well. And increasingly, people looking to hold onto their devices longer, having that repair option there is really important. A little bugbear of me is whenever I'm out and about and I see people without a case on their phone, it really kind of gives me the ick. It's like, why wouldn't you do that? Protect your phone so it can last for a little bit longer. Take back of CPE, so customer premise equipment, so that's routers, TV boxes as well. In 2024, we took back 2.4 million. They all go up to a partner in Scotland who refurb them, and they now actually go back into stock to then be used for new customers as well. So we actually treat the refurb stuff the same as new, and there's huge monetary benefits there. I'll get onto a slide later as well. And interesting as well, we're now starting to, one of our value brands, so PlusNet, which is part of the group, we're actually taking some of the kind of excess Smart Hub 2, so one of the older generations of routers, taking the BT case off it, and then putting a PlusNet router on it, so actually reskinning it, and then using that as then a device there. So as you can appreciate, that's saving money and saving resources as well. And then within some of our new operations as well, we've rolled out Colliebox, if anyone's come across it, so a reusable container. So instead of having to use disposable packaging, which people just use and throw away, it's actually a really nice 7-day basically lease that you can take a turbo container, use it, put your food in it, take it to your desk, take it home, and then bring it back. And if you don't, you then get charged £5, or if you do, then you get your deposit back, which is really nice and had a really positive impact within some of our offices. And just touching on that circularity benefits, as I said, all our hubs and routers are effectively leased to the customer now. So before 2020, they didn't. So at the end of, say, a contract, or if you left the business, it was down to the whim of the customer to do the right thing with it. But in most cases, because a router is quite small, people either just chuck it in a drawer or chuck it, unfortunately, in the bin. So now they lease it. So they have to send it back to us within 60 days. Otherwise, they get a penalty. And certainly if you dangle a big penalty, people are like, yep, you can have it back. So we get that back. As I say, it goes and gets refurbed. And typically about 70% of it gets refurbed. Some of it, for whatever reasons, might not be up to scratch, and then it goes off to recyclers, so where they break it all apart for the plastics and electronics. But as I touched on, big monetary benefit. So you can see that 25 million pounds on average, and that's the cost of refurbing it versus buying new. And a lot of our routers are made out in the Far East. So also that then reduces, supply chain constraints as well, and the CO2 as well, the benefit. So we worked with the Carbon Trust a couple of years ago to analyse the benefit of that refurb operation versus buying new. And based on the volume that we did last year, it's about 40,000 tonnes of emission saved. So that really ties into that. When you have some circularity actions, you're then reducing that kind of upstream emission footprint because we weren't having to buy new stuff there. And some of the stats out of that assessment, as you can see, on average, the cost of new versus refurb was about 82% lower. So the CFO loves refurb. And then from the carbon side of things, about 91% reduction as well. So my team love that. So you keep kind of both parties happy. And the other thing about circularity there is, I think there's I see 6 kind of benefits that you have. You've got either it's a cost saving, through that refurb activity, or revenue generation. So where we're extracting some of that excess and end-of-life material from our exchange, you can, have revenue coming from it as well. That upstream scope 3 emissions reductions as well. That supply chain risk, as we're getting into a warmer planet, and particularly out in the Far East when a lot of electronics are made, increased risk of typhoon and storms. If you're solely reliant on stuff coming in from the other side of the world, that could really, be at risk if the stuff isn't there. Hence why being able to collect some of our old equipment back within the UK, refurb it, and have it back in stock again. And the same goes within kind of the refurb market for smartphones. If you can get the stuff from people and out of their drawers and then refurbish it, it really then de-risks that supply chain. So you've got the stock there for when people want to buy it. Increasing customer demand. So, increasingly you're seeing a portfolio of customers really wanting to, buy something that is, seen as green or more sustainable. So refurb's a great opportunity there. And we're seeing, the refurb market within smartphones, grow year on year, and, new sales of phones actually kind of being fairly steady. And then also simulate those secondary markets as well. So as we can get those raw materials out, we're supporting those downstream recyclers who can then invest in new equipment for extracting some of the more harder materials to recover. And then also managing kind of compliance and regulations. So, big one, CSRD, which we are potentially getting impacted by because we do have EU operations there. Some of the information that's needed there, we need to really understand what we're doing within our value chain and that material kind of inflow, outflow of materials within our business. So, I see it as a huge opportunity directly linked in with net zero. And it's not just us that, are doing all the things. A lot of the telcos globally, they operate on the same system and are doing all the same stuff to support, both the markets that they work in, getting material and products back, responding to regulations, and also kind of de-risking. And it's a pleasure that we're able to all work collaboratively together to kind of address some of these common issues. That's all me. I think I've got 8 minutes for some questions, so I'll hand it over to you. But thanks for having me.
Hi, thank you. I'm Isabel Devon. I'm at the Carbon Trust, so thank you for the shout out. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage to get others in the organization to buy into this? I mean, this is a massive program. This is a massive impact program. How did you get your stakeholders involved?
Yeah, so I'm always one where you shouldn't, if you have to speak in, say, monetary terms, don't shy away from that. If that's the language that gets it over the line, then that's great. And then the team who are doing it because of the sustainability or the climate or any type of benefit there, that's almost like a secondary benefit to that person. But if you went into some people and say we should do this because it's better for the planet, they probably just push you straight out. So where you can either see that kind of monetary opportunity, sometimes there's efficiencies as well. So within our B2B side of the business, we have a business sustainability forum, and every year they run a kind of competition where people can come up with a proposition or an opportunity. And some of the ideas that came through were just simple things where they actually just took a step back, reviewed their systems and processes. There's one where a customer would order something and they'd automatically be sent a device. I think it was kind of a telephone. But actually, when they looked into it, in some cases they didn't need it. So then they just changed that system, added an extra step in, and that avoided thousands of phones being sent out, which then the customer either had to deal with it and we had to then get it back. And I think it saved about £1 million. So it's just sometimes stepping back and saying, have you looked in your area? And is there stuff you can tweak? Little things that they've done now in the consumer return process in terms of moving it a bit more digital, removing the need for the kind of return carrier bag and using some of the existing logistics that say post office offer through like Every and Amazon, so we're not sending unnecessary material out. So sometimes it's just little things there. And yeah, I think that convincing bit, depending on how big a challenge you need to go after, you might have to kind of pull more levers than others. But I think sometimes it's just speaking the language of that particular area in terms of some of the challenges they might have, or if they got under certain pressures, how can you, speak in their terms and then weave in that kind of sustainability benefit, which then within my team is the bit you're kind of trying to drive forward. One question down here.
Hey Matt, thank you. My name's Emily McCulloch-Nolan. I'm from Supercritical, a carbon removal marketplace. I'd love to hear a bit more about your thinking around neutralisation and how you're weighing up the arguments to do that kind of investment and not do that kind of investment.
Yeah, so I think, because ourselves and every other company is setting it as a target, you're implicitly saying you're going to have to do removals because 100% there's still going to be some residual emissions left over. I think for us, it's exploring how you can socialise that cost. Because if we just look at say what our base year is and then what say a minimum 10% would be, that's quite a big pot. And looking at current market rate, that's a big bill. If I was then to present that to the CFO and say, oh by the way, we need X millions of pounds for this, they'd probably say, and there's no immediate kind of return on investment in the same way you might say investing in EVs, you've got direct benefit there, doing stuff on solar, behind the meter, you've then got cost savings as well. So I think for us it's the challenge of, because we've set net zero, we're going to have to do it. Interestingly, you're seeing questions come because obviously we've got shareholders starting to ask questions about what we're doing in that kind of neutralisation space and what our thinking is and how that will work. One area I'm currently exploring to kind of dip our toe in is, could we use our air travel as an example, where if we put in, say, for example, a carbon price on the air travel, will either make people go, actually, I might not fly because it's now a little bit more expensive for that team, pick a different option, or then if they still do travel, it's then creating a pot of money that can be used for it, and then using that as an example of, could we do a similar pricing model within other parts of the business, so they can kind of visualize, the cost of, buying from that supplier if there's an additional kind of carbon cost, and then use that money for it. So we're still really early on in that days, and as you can probably appreciate, lots of people come to us and say, hey, what are you doing about removals and what that looks like? But increasingly, I think, as we certainly get to that FY31 target, where we're still looking to neutralise that operational emissions, we're going to have to start kind of shaping up what that picture looks like, and understandably, the earlier we can invest in those areas, kind of locks in that security and also stimulates the market as well. So hopefully, that carbon market has the same kind of kick that you saw in solar 20 years ago. People say, oh, it's far too expensive, no one's going to do it, and obviously costs come down, and then it took off. So I think we're still exploring that as we get kind of closer to those dates. But I think we'll need to kind of move in the dial over the next kind of 12 to 24 months on it.
We've had some questions coming online.
Okay.
Can I chuck a couple in? Firstly, how do you encourage more people to hand in their unused or broken mobile devices? How do you encourage people to play their part?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a challenge because, and so previously to BT, I used to work for a leading electrical retailer, so kind of saw that some of those challenges are there. So when the stuff is small, that's a challenge because people can just easily just chuck it away, put it in a drawer. And especially when stuff is small and contains data, or that perceived fear of what happens to that data, that's even more of a challenge. So the key thing is communicating what actually happens to your device. If you were to buy a new fridge, you haven't really got room to keep a second fridge, so you are keen for someone to take it away. So it's overcoming those barriers. Obviously, particularly as I touched on within smartphones and laptops, they typically hold their value. And I think the really important thing is that touch point of, at the point, say you are upgrading, trade in then. Because if you keep it for another year or two, it could have been worth, say, £300 now. In 2 years' time, it could be worth £100, £50, and then definitely they'll just go, well, I can't be bothered now, I'll leave it. So it's really doing it at the time of action, so we can get it back, and that also increases the chance of that device to be reused as well, because otherwise it's getting too near its kind of end of the kind of generational cycle of that device. So it's really giving that confidence that, data is secure, do it now, because often most people keep their phone as a backup and a spare. So I think that's a challenge for the whole sector, is how can you give a solution where you don't need to have a backup or spare, or could you offer them like a, older refurb device as the spare, rather than keeping that one which kind of could be more value. So still some challenges, and sometimes it's a bit of psychology that is in there as well, but we kind of do all the touch points to try and encourage it as best possible. But ultimately, it's down to you as the person to do it. Yeah.
To play a part. I've just looked at the clock, and there's one further question which touches on something that I wanted to ask as well, which is about supply chain. I noticed that BT is doing a really robust job. It's got tough, realistic targets, but the target for reducing emissions in your supply chain is proportionately lower than maybe your scope 1. Yep. Is that simply a reflection that managing the supply chain is just so much more difficult? Why do you not set a much higher ambition?
Yeah, so if you look at kind of the lower and higher kind of expectations, say like SBTi, that 42% is kind of roughly kind of in the middle, and arguably it is kind of realistic. So to date, we've done 25% reduction since FY17. And really, if you look at kind of the nature of our supply chain, a lot of it is in kind of Asia when you follow it back in terms of those countries there. So naturally, logically, I think the reduction you see in the supply chain is going to be slightly slow in the kind of in the 2020s. Then naturally, as those economies really scale up decarbonisation, you'll then see a tick up. So it was that balance of not setting something that actually you couldn't see a path to it. And at the moment, we can see a path to that 42 based on one of those key suppliers that we're dealing with. And one that is, realistic, that it's not too far away, that then discourages people to say, oh, we've got no chance hitting it, but then it's not too low that actually then doesn't really move the dial. Yeah. So, from my perspective, I think, you'll see then, really then the industry kind of, ramp up in the 2030s as a lot of those economies that then we're buying technologies decarbonise, and that naturally then feeds into the footprint of the products and the services that we're buying. Cool.
Matt, there's a whole load more questions that have come online. We simply don't have the time to take them, so I apologise. Thank you very much. It's a hard act to start the day off, but this was an absolutely brilliant presentation. I've enjoyed it immensely. Matt Manning from BT, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.